This week, our topic is action versus intention, and I'll be taking the side of intention, and Rabbi Walker is by just definition then taking the side of action, the choices that are left. But we wanted to start off with a quick text before we kind of dove more deeply into our sources to kind of set this up. So if we go over here in Mishnah Brachot, there's this wonderful set of Mishnayot that come one right after the other. And it sets up what's really a long-standing debate in, I think, Jewish thought, this idea of keva and kavanah, the fixed prayer or saying the prayers with intention. You have Rabban Gamliel who says, B'chol yom mitpalel adam shmona esrei, every day a person should say the Amidah, the 18 blessings, right? And Rabbi Joshua says that you should say a shortened version. And Rabbi Akiva says if you know the full prayer, you say the full 18, and if not, you just do the shortened version, right? That's kind of to the side. Their position, Rabbi Gamliel's position, is that every day a person has to say the Amidah, the 18 blessings. You have to do the action of saying it. But then in the very next Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer comes in and says, "Ha'osei tefilato keva, ein tefilato tachanunim." If a person makes their prayer fixed, it's not true prayer. It's not true supplication, right? He says that you should say words of your heart instead. You shouldn't say words that you don't mean. You should have the intention behind the action of prayer, or else it's not prayer, versus Rabban Gamliel, who says it's the words that matter, the action, the act of praying. Now, this debate is really focused here in prayer, but it really, I think, extends to all areas of Jewish life. Is that fair to say, Rabbi Walker?
Yes.
Right, no. So I think it comes in, you'll see how it plays out in halakha and other areas as well. So that's really what our debate's going to be about tonight, with Rabbi Walker arguing for the sake of the action itself, and me arguing about the kavanah, the intent behind the action, that's kind of the true judge, what really matters. And with that, I'll pass it over to Rabbi Walker if you have anything else to add or you want to dive into your first argument.
Yeah, I think we can just dive in. We're ready. Sorry, I was trying to deal with, apparently I sent out the wrong link, so I was trying to see if I could send out the right one, but it's too complicated to do. So here, I'm just going to post, well, everyone here has the link, but here, if you hear from anyone, someone's like texting you, there it is. You can copy paste it. Okay. Yeah, so we have this idea of intention, and I'm going to argue that the most important thing is the action, that intention is not actually very important. I mean, it has a place, right? As we've seen in all of our other debates, there's always some middle ground, but I think that action far outweighs intention. And so I'll start us off with a text. So I'm going to do a little screen share, because always. Okay. And so here, actually, this really goes off of the introductory text that that Rabbi Sachs was presented, and I think it's this nice idea of like keva versus kavanah and fixed versus having intention. And I'm going to show that actually the intention part actually isn't important. It's kind of more fluff. So here we go. Great. Okay. So action versus intention. And I'm going to do so you don't have to see that I have like a million tabs open. We'll just do that. Okay, great. So here we have, this is the Shulchan Aruch. This is a Jewish law code. This is where we get a lot of our practices from. And so this is from Orach Chaim, which is the section that has stuff around prayers, has stuff around holidays, it has all of that. And so it kind of has like deduced the arguments in the Talmud down to like, okay, here's the takeaway. So And it's going to seem like at first I am making a point for Rabbi Sachs, but actually it's a point for me. So it says, one who prays the Amidah needs to have the proper intent for all the blessings. But if he's not able to concentrate on all of them, he should at least concentrate on the blessing of the forefathers and foremothers, right? That's the first blessing. If he didn't have the proper intent while saying the blessing of the forefathers, even if he had the right intent for the rest of the blessings, he needs to return to the beginning of the Amidah and pray. So what they're saying here is, okay, you need to have intention, but if you don't have intention, you need to at least have intention for like the first blessing. And if you don't have for that, here he's saying, actually you have to go back, it's important. But we have the Ramah's gloss, and the Ramah is the Ashkenazi commentator on the Shulchan Aruch. So Shulchan Aruch is more Sephardi, and so I know I am an Ashkenazi Jew, so I'm gonna go with the Ramah here, who's Ashkenazi, and he says that, well, nowadays we do not return to repeat the prayer in the case where one didn't pray with intent, because there's a fair chance that even when he returns to the beginning of the Amidah, he will not have the right intent. So why should he return? So this idea that, okay, so yeah, maybe in the ideal world, right, we want both action and intent to line up. But what the Ramah is saying here is like, okay, if you don't have that intent, you still did it, and that's enough, right? In an ideal world, okay, we want both of those things, but here the action is more important, and you did say the prayer, even if you weren't like super concentrating on it, you did it and you got it done. So good job. So I think in a lot of ways, we'll see here that it's about the action and it's not about the intent. So I'll pass it over to you.
I appreciate it, because I think you made my argument for me there. You gave me the point. That was a great source. Although I apologize, it wasn't on the screen. There was a different one showing a Mishnah Torah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so weird.
Do you want to share that source again really quickly on the screen? You have it handy still?
Yes, that's so weird. That was, maybe do I have, okay, now do you see?
There it is. There it is.
Oh, okay. Well, the Mishnah Torah is coming later, so
right.
That was a spoiler alert.
It's okay. Right? One who prays the Amidah needs to have the proper intent for all the blessings, but if not, then you should at least concentrate on the first part. And if you can't do that, then you should have this part and that part, and you should return. And now we don't return because we don't, it's unlikely we'll be able to have that intent. All this shows is that if you can't have the ideal, you settle for what you can get. But the ideal is still intent. Intent is the bigger part. Intent is what makes the prayer important and its efficacy. Both of this whole source, both the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah's gloss, I think, lean here on that point. I'll put somebody else on the screen now.
Stop the share. Yeah.
So if we go over here to further on in another spot in Shulchan Aruch, we have a example here. Somebody's riding on a donkey, and the time comes to pray the Amidah. They are not required to descend in order to pray, even if they have someone to hold the donkey for them while they pray. Rather, they may pray it while they go along, right? What is going on here? You're not supposed to pray. Everyone knows the Amidah is called the Amidah for a good reason, because you stand when you say it. Could you imagine not standing, instead riding along in your car while you're saying the Amidah? That's the equivalent here. But what's happening? Why is it that you, even if you have somebody else to hold the donkey, what is this about holding the donkey? You're worried that maybe your donkey will run off and you can't get it. And thus, if one is traveling in a boat or in a caravan, they're able to stand, they should stand. But if they can't, they may sit in their place and pray. Again, you're allowed to sit and say the Amidah. Similarly, if one's traveling on foot, you can pray as you walk, even if you're not facing towards Jerusalem. If you're going on a journey, you can walk and pray while facing the wrong direction. You don't have to stand still. What is this saying? It's saying that it's more important for you to have the intention behind. Because the fear is that if you stopped your journey, you'd be worried that maybe your donkey is going to run away, or maybe that you're going to be late on your journey and you're not going to get home in time or get to where your appointment is in time, or maybe you're going to get stopped by bandits. So for the purpose of being able to focus and have the intention in your prayer, you're allowed to actually do a lesser version of the act. The ideal is to do the Amidah while standing still, but you're allowed to do this lesser version while riding on the back of your animal, because it's important for you to have intention. They put that above the action itself. And it's interesting because it applies even, it's not just Bimkom Sakanan, a dangerous extreme example, right? We've made a lot of leeways, a lot of synagogues in light of COVID because of this idea of we're in a extenuating circumstance. But the gloss here is that this applies even if you're not in a dangerous area. Because if a traveler stops and prays to delay the delay to their journey bothers them, and your mind is unfocused, and therefore you're unable to direct yourself in prayer, you can do the Amidah from an incorrect position. And it's better that you do it that way than to do it where it's unfocused. But this goes on in all sorts of different areas. But we're just doing short openings first, right, Rabbi Walker? I'll dive back into other sources. I'll pass it back to you. So you'll see that today, this is the teaching. Go. Sorry.
Great. Thank you. I always like the idea of praying on a donkey. Okay, well, I mean, I would say either way, they're still doing the action, but some nice points you brought up. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears, and hopefully we are going to, I'm going to share the correct screen. So in a moment, I'm going to share that, and we're going to look at, we're actually going all the way back to the Torah, to the book of Numbers from Midbar. We're going to look at the idea of sacrifices, and when we have to offer a sacrifice, we're not going to dive deep into it, but there is this one type of sacrifice that the Israelites have to offer when they've sinned, even if it was unintentionally, or especially if it's unintentionally. So there are different sacrifices that Israelites have to offer for different reasons if they've done something wrong, to kind of make up for it, right? It's this like physical thing that is saying, okay, I did something wrong, and here's my physical action to say, like, I did the wrong thing, and I want to atone and do better, right? And obviously we don't do those sacrifices anymore, but there's still the elements of tshuva. So I just want to show you the screen. Okay, here we go. So we all see, is it correct? Do you see the book of Numbers or some text that's Hebrew? Okay, great. Perfect. Oh, that was weird. Okay, so here we go. So the book of Numbers, 15, 22 to 28, and I'm gonna do it in the English, but if you want to look at the Hebrew, you can kind of see it. So if you unwittingly, and the word is tishgu, so this idea of shkaga or bishkaga, it's like this accident. So it's when you do something by accident, right? It's not your intention, you do it by accident. So if you unwittingly fail to observe any one of the commandments that God has declared to Moses, anything that God has commanded upon you through Moses, from the day that God gave the commandments and on through the ages, if this was done unwittingly, right, again, by accident, without intention, through the inadvertence of the community, the whole community shall present one bull of the herd as a burnt offering of pleasing odor to God, with its proper meal offering and libation, and one he-goat as a sin offering. And then the priest, so this idea that if you do something by accident, you still have to bring forward a sacrifice. You still did something wrong that you need to atone for. So even though it didn't matter if the intention was what the intention was, the action still had an effect. It still went against one of the commandments. And so they have to bring this sacrifice on behalf of the community. Right, and then it continues on. So that's kind of like a communal one. And then here, it's also in the case of an individual. So if an individual does so, right, you still have to offer, here it is, a she-goat in its first year as a sin offering. You still need to make an offering, no matter what your intention was, right? Even if you didn't mean to do the thing, you still made that action and you did something wrong, and so you need to have another action to kind of counteract that first action. And so I'll continue. So that idea continues with we're going back to Yom Kippur. Did you miss Yom Kippur? I don't know. Okay, I feel like I've had a high holiday thing in each of these. So here we have our our high holiday thing here is so in the Yom Kippur liturgy, when we're praying on Yom Kippur, there's that whole section. You remember the vidui, the confession, where it's gonna, we hit our chest and we say, nine, 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 and then we say al chaitz, right? Al chaitz shechatanu lefanecha. Okay, so here are some that I wanted to pull out of the al chaitz portion. So right, so it says here, al chaitz shechatanu lefanecha biyodim uvelo yodim, right? So we say, and for the sin we committed before you knowingly or unknowingly. So again, doesn't matter what the intention was, that there's still that action, that we did that thing, and so we still have to make amends. We still have to apologize for it, whether we knew we did it or not. That action still took place, and that action had an impact, and we need to make right. And then it continues. I kind of skipped a few lines, right? But it says, for transgressing positive commandments and for transgressing prohibitive commandments, or whether the prohibition can be corrected by a specifically prescribed act, or whether it cannot be corrected by a specifically prescribed act. Right? So if it's like obvious, kind of what are the things we need to do to make up for it, whether that's obvious or not, still have to, make amends. And then it says, for those of which we are aware and those of which we are not aware. So again, right, even if we are not aware, we still did it. It still has an impact. And we still need to do tshuva. We still need to apologize and make up for it because it's about the action. Okay, so we're going to continue on. Sorry, I put my source a little out of order. I'm sorry if I'm making you all. Oh, okay. This is fun. Okay, so now I want to have a little Hanukkah text here because it's almost Hanukkah. So I thought I'd bring one in. I mean, it's not really about Hanukkah, but it has Hanukkah in it. So right, this idea that even if we didn't intend for something to happen, we still have consequences. Yeah, their actions still have consequences. Whether or not we meant to do something, it still results in things happening in effect. So here we have, this is in the Mishnah. This is actually a fun fact. One of the few times Hanukkah is mentioned in the Mishnah. Hanukkah, we don't learn a lot about Hanukkah from the Mishnah, from this text from 100, 200 CE. There's mention of Hanukkah, but it doesn't tell us, it doesn't say anything about what we do for Hanukkah. It just says in this text, it'll say there's a Hanukkah lamp, but it doesn't say what that looks like. There's very little, but this is one of the places where Hanukkah is mentioned, and you'll see it's mentioned in a really interesting way. So, okay, so we have, here we go. Wait, this is, oh no. Oh, okay, here we go. If a spark went out from under the hammer and caused damage, he is liable, right? So we're talking about a blacksmith or someone who's pounding metal. The spark went out and caught fire. Again, obviously this person is not trying to catch something on fire, but it did. He's liable, so he's responsible. He needs to pay the damages of whatever happened. And then it says, if a camel laden with flax passed by in the public domain, right? So that's outside where everyone passed by in the public domain, and its load of flax entered into a shop and caught on fire from the store owner's candle and lit a large house on fire, the owner of the camel is liable. Okay, right? So we have this, and there's a lot of stuff. This is in Bava Kama. There's it's all torts and damages, and so we have a lot of really interesting, very contrived scenarios. But here's one, right? So we have a camel who has a lot. I just picture it kind of overloaded with this highly flammable flax on its back, and it's passing by, and there's a shop with its door open, and there's a candle inside, and somehow the flax is so wide, and this street is narrow enough that the flax kind of goes into the shop. And manages to hit the fire, the candle just right, that it lights fire, and then the house is lit on fire, and then that's, in that case, the owner of the camel is liable. The responsibility for that damage. He has to make up the damage. But if the shopkeeper left his candle outside, the shopkeeper is liable, right? So once it goes from being inside the shop, the private property, to outside, that means that the shopkeeper is the one who is now responsible for those damages. But, right, here's the notable exception. Rabbi Judah says if it was a Hanukkah light, he is exempt, right? So if this outside candle, menorah, whatever it is for Hanukkah, he's exempt. And there's a whole discussion in the Talmud about why, and some people say it's because it's a mitzvah, and we don't want to deter people from lighting the Hanukkah lamp. And you're supposed to put the lamp outside. Right now we do it in our windows, but I don't know if you've been to, I know they do it a lot in Jerusalem. I've seen around some places where they actually will put the Hanukkah in like a little glass box and actually put it outside, like on right by their doors. And that's kind of the ideal way to do it. But I do it inside by a window if I can. And anyway, so this goes back, right? So they were putting their Hanukkah lights outside their doors like that. And yeah, so I bring this here to show that, right, none of these things are on purpose, right? There's no intention here, but rather it's about the action. It's that, right, something happened and there are consequences, and we need to make sure that we're being careful, because even if, the person who owned the camel or the shopkeeper, right, obviously they didn't want to cause damage. They didn't intend for this to happen, but it still happened. And so something still needs to happen, right? So there we go. Okay, and then this is just the same thing. This is just the version of it from the Talmud. So we're gonna skip that. And okay, I think there was one more, but I'm just gonna stop my screen share. Great. So all right, so we have so in these two examples, right, we have this idea of the korban chatat, that whether or not you intended to sin, whether or not you even knew you were doing something wrong, that we still have to make amends, that there's still an impact and something physical that happens. And so we need to make up for that. And right, and the same thing with the camel here. Right, even though there's no intent, especially the camel, but even the person, right, the shopkeeper didn't put the light outside his store to try and cause damage, but that's what it ended up doing, and that was a real effect, that now he's liable for that damage, and he has to go through these actions to make it better. So intent is one thing, but action is what's important here. And yeah, I'll turn it over to Rabbi Sachs.
All right, I appreciate it. You're giving me some great sources here. I want to address this one first, and we'll go backwards. The key difference here, I think, in this Mishnah isn't the question of intention, right? It's about negligence, because in the first example, if the camel with flax passed in public domain and its flax entered into the guy's shop and knocked over a candle in the shop, the owner of the camel is liable, because it's the camel owner's responsibility to make sure his camel doesn't trespass inside somebody else's shop. Right? We're not thinking stores on Young Street. We're thinking the shuk in the old city when they're little stalls. But when your camel, something in it sticking out and knocks over a candle in a guy's shop, you're responsible because you were negligent, versus if the shopkeeper leaves a candle outside of their shop, now the shopkeeper is negligent. So it's not a question, because neither of them have intention here, but there's a difference in the two scenarios over who's responsible. And the difference there is about negligence. Who is it who should have had intention, who should have been thinking about things? But I don't want to focus too much on that, but the bigger one is going to the idea of sacrifice, right? It is absolutely true, as Rabbi Walker said, that somebody who sins unintentionally has to ask for expiation, right? You have to ask God for tshuva. Someone who sins accidentally has to perform a sacrifice. But there's a difference, because your punishment for an accidental sin, an unintentional avera, a shogeg, is different than if you did it intentionally. So there's this beautiful midrash here from Devrim Rabbah, and this is what scripture says: to do what is right and just is more desired by the Lord than sacrifice, right? Doing good is even better than sacrifice. Scripture does not say as much as sacrifice, but more than sacrifice. How so? And now here's where the Midrash gives us a couple of reasons of why action could be better than sacrifice. Right? That's not the main focus. The first reason is that sacrifice only exists in the temple, but you can do what is right and just inside and outside the temple. So therefore, it's a greater mitzvah than sacrifice. But this is the interesting one. Sacrifice can only atone for unintentional sins, accidental sins, but righteousness and justice can atone even for intentional sins. Because the punishment for an intentional sin isn't the same as the punishment for an accidental sin, which is sacrifice. The punishment for an intentional sin is karet, is being cut off from God, whatever that means, being cut off from the people of Israel. Right? It's the same way that we have ideas of cities of refuge. An intentional murderer is killed. An unintentional murderer is still punished, but they're punished by being placed in a city of refuge. Their punishment is lessened, which I think goes to show that the result, the action, right, the result of what happens isn't the deciding difference of what's better or worse. It's the person's intention behind it. The person who sins intentionally is cut off from God, versus the person who sins unintentionally, they have to offer a sacrifice, right? Our intentions do make a major difference. Here, we're gonna look at another idea of an unintentional sin. If you cook food on Shabbat, this is from Shulchan Aruch, one who cooks food on Shabbat or performs any of the forbidden labors on Shabbat, if you do it intentionally, right, the product of the Shabbos violation is forbidden for you forever, but others can eat it after Shabbat. So for example, if I baked bread on Shabbat, that bread, not only is it the sin of me baking bread, if I did it intentionally, if I ever eat that bread, I've done another sin. That's bread is forbidden to me because of my intention when I baked it. But if I accidentally baked bread on Shabbat, I forgot it was Shabbat and I baked bread, now, because my sin is lessened because the same action, different intent, now, after Shabbat, I'm allowed to eat that bread as long as I wait after Shabbos the amount of time it would have taken me to make such bread, right? If done accidentally, the food is forbidden to him during the day, but may be eaten by everyone, including him, even immediately after Shabbos. I apologize. Right? Immediately after Shabbat, I can benefit from that bread. Here's another idea of damages. A person who humiliates someone does not have to compensate for the humiliation unless they acted intentionally, right? Intent decides the action. The action's the same, you humiliate someone, but it's only if you're intended to do it, do you have to pay damages. If, however, he humiliated a person unintentionally, he is exempt. Accordingly, if one caused humiliation while asleep or the like, they are exempt. So we see here in the realm of damages, it's quite clear, even the same act has a different result depending on the intention, because the intention is the important part behind the act. What a person intends is really predictive about their future behavior, right? We don't punish someone who tried to do good if a bad thing happened as a result, in the same way as we punish someone who did a bad thing intentionally. And I think that, right, law is quite clear on that, right? That's not just in Jewish law, that's the same in civil law. But here we're gonna look at another source here with the idea of, now we looked at prayer, but I wanna look at another part of prayer. A person who is reading the Torah and the time for its recital arrived, right? The time for the recital of the Shema, they're reading the Torah and they happen to be reading the passage of the Shema. And it also is the time that you're required to say the Shema, right? We have to say it twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. If they direct their heart, they fulfill their obligation, right? Im kiven libo yatsa, they fulfill their obligation. But if they have not, they haven't fulfilled their obligation. They're both reading the same thing. Rabbi Walker and I are sitting there, as we do every night, opening our scrolls of Torah and reading along, and we come to the passage of Shema, and it happens to be the time that we're supposed to say the Shema in the evening. but I don't intend to fulfill my obligation to recite the Shema of the evening, and Rabbi Walker does, even though we're doing the exact same thing, the result is different. She has fulfilled the mitzvah and I haven't. I have not done the mitzvah. And this goes on. In the breaks between the sections, one may give greeting out of respect and return greeting. In the middle of a section, right, it's talking about interruptions. You're not allowed to interrupt in prayer. And this is telling us where we can have a hefsek, where we can interrupt. In the middle of a section, one may give greeting out of fear and return it, right, for the same reason. This is Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Judah says in the middle, you can give greeting out of fear and return it out of respect. And in the breaks between paragraphs, you can give greeting out of respect and return it to everyone. They're all interruptions, but what's the difference between them? You can do an interruption out of fear, right? Some things come up that makes you fear for your life, because your intent there is different than you greeting someone just out of respect or just to say hello. The action is the same, an interruption in the prayer, but it's the intent behind it that decides the validity. So we've looked now at a source about accidental sins, and we've looked at a source here about the kavanah, intention as it affects prayer. I want to look at one more source, and then I will hand it over, which really I think gets to the root of the problem. This is from Masechet Nazir, right? It's about the Nazarites. Sorry, I lost my share button. Here we go. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, greater is a transgression committed for its own sake, right, than a mitzvah for the sake of heaven. It is better that you sin with good intentions than do a mitzvah with bad intentions. And the Gemara responds, didn't Rav Yehuda say that Rav said a person should always occupy themselves with Torah and mitzvot, even not for their own sake, right? That you should do Torah and mitzvot, even if it's not for, right, just the sake of the Torah, for the kind of pure purpose, that pure intention, right? As it is through acts performed not for their own sake, that eventually it becomes for their own sake, right? Na'aseh v'nishma, that's what the Jews famously said. We will do, and then we will understand. Action came first, but always with the goal of the intention. The idea being that action brings about the intention, because the intention is the ultimate goal behind it. But this is the answer of how they resolve these two conflicting statements. Because one says that action without intention is good because eventually you'll intend, right? Intention is still the best, ideal. And the other person said it's greater to do bad for good reasons than to do good for bad reasons. And this is the emendation of how we rectify and get these two, resolve this contradiction. One must amend the above statement and say, a transgression for the sake of heaven is equivalent to a mitzvah not for its own sake. A sin with good intention is at least equal to a mitzvah, a commandment with a bad intention. And they cite here Yael. And if you're familiar with the story of Yael, great. If you're not familiar with her, you should be.
She's my fave. Yeah, go read her.
She is, right, forgive my French, right? She is badass. She is a cool person in the biblical narrative. But Yael is blessed above all women shall Yael be, the wife of Heber the Kenite, above women in the tent, she shall be blessed. And the Gemara says, who are these women in the tent that they're referring to? Sarah, Becca, Rachel, and Leah. But the rabbis want to know, how can you compare Yael to Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah? Because these are our matriarchs, and Yael, for those of you that don't know the story, she slept with Sisera, with the foreign general, for the sake of, right, destroying him and saving the Jewish people. But it was a sin still to do this, to sleep with him. So how can you say that her forbidden intercourse is on par with the intercourse of the matriarchs and patriarchs, those who brought about the Jewish people? And the answer they give is that her transgression for a good reason is as good, if not better, than a mitzvah for a bad reason. So again, I think these sources are very, very clear. Intention is at the end of the day what decides. We don't judge actions based on the actions themselves. We don't judge actions based on the results of those actions. We judge actions based on the intention of the person acting. Take it away, Rabbi.
Ooh, okay. Well, one of the things you just said, well, one, I just love Yael, so kudos to you for figuring it. Although I don't love that text about Yael, but whatever. So she's great. So everyone should go check her out in the Book of Judges. Yes, but right, what you just said is how do we judge actions? And you said that we don't judge actions based on their results. Well, I'm gonna just show a little thing that I think I really disagree. We do judge actions based on their results. We do judge actions based on their impact, and I have some sources to back it up. So in a moment, I will share the screen. But we're gonna talk about we're getting in. I love that this subject kind of takes us across so many different like realms of Jewish law. So I'm about to we're going to go into a little bit of Shabbat. And Shabbat in Jewish law, there's just so much there. I feel like I'm still constantly learning about all the different things, but we're going to talk about there are different categories of work or of creative work that you're not supposed to do. And then there's a discussion of, okay, like if you do something and it does something else by accident, have you done work, right? So that was vague, so I'm going to show you the text and explain it better. Here we go. Okay, so this is the Rambam. So I think this was the text that you saw earlier, but now we're going to actually do this. So this is from some Rambam, aka Maimonides, from the Mishnah Torah. So again, this is another law code that helps us kind of distill all of the arguments in the Talmud, and we're actually going to see an argument from the Talmud next, but this is a lot more clear than that's going to be. Okay, so we're talking about someone who does something and forbidden work is done through it, even though forbidden on Shabbat, he does something against Shabbat, even though he didn't mean it, like even though that's not what he's trying to go for, that's what happened. Okay, so here's what it says. But if he did an act, aval asa ma'aseh v'naseh biglalo malacha, did an act and forbidden work, malacha, is done through it, such that it is certain that it will be done from that act, he is liable, right? He's guilty. This idea of we hold him accountable, even if he did not intend to do the work. For it is well known that it's impossible that this work would not be done through this act. Okay, so I'm just going to read the example because it will make more sense. How is this? If one needs the head of a chicken for an infant to play with, and he cuts off its head on Shabbat, even though his end purpose is not solely to kill the chicken, he is liable, since it is well known that it is impossible to cut off the head of a living being and that it should live. Rather, death comes as a result of his action, and likewise with anything that is similar to this. Okay, so yes, there's a great question that you all might be thinking, like, who gives their toddler a dead chicken head to play with? I don't have a good answer for that, but I guess they had to get creative. But anyway, regardless, so they're bringing up this example of, so it's Shabbat, and this person wants to give their child a toy to play with, and that toy is going to be the chicken head. But there's no way that they can take the chicken head off the chicken without killing it, right? Even though their intention is not to kill the chicken still dies, right? The chicken still gets killed when you take off the chicken's head. And this idea in halakha, if you want to hear the Hebrew term for it, is psik reisha, which I feel like it should be in the Hebrew somewhere, but psik reisha, it's like originally in the Talmud, and then here Maimonides is drawing it out, is this idea of psik reisha is if you cut off its head, right? If you cut off its head, and the continuation of that phrase is below yamu or lo muta, right? Depending on if you're doing in the Hebrew or the Aramaic. So you cut off its head and it won't die. So this has become a whole category of halachot about Shabbat, is psik reisha, is this idea of you're doing something, but you're not necessarily trying to do something that violates Shabbat, but there's no way around it, right? So you're not trying to violate Shabbat, you're just taking the chicken head off, but there's no way around killing the chicken from when you take off the chicken's head, right? So So that's one example of this idea, right? So it doesn't matter the intention. Even if he didn't intend to kill the chicken still dies, and so he is liable. He is guilty for desecrating Shabbat in that way. And there's actually a whole argument. So I'm going to keep going. So in the Talmud, to give a few more examples of this. So here we have, and this is there's like so much discussion of this. And I was like going through it and getting confused. So, but here, another example is we have the example of a lamp, right? And on Shabbat, we're not supposed to mess with fire. So we light our Shabbat candles and we leave them, we don't move them. And why is that? And so here it's this idea, and we'll go through in the text in a second, excuse me, but this idea that even if you don't mean to extinguish a light, when you move it, it's probably going to get extinguished, right? So it's like, even if you don't mean to, it's going to happen. So, and I mean, I think here that's like, it's along the lines of Sikh Resha, but like maybe slightly different because it's not necessarily guaranteed that you're going to extinguish the light, but it's pretty likely. I don't know. I know whenever I try and move a candle, not on Shabbat because I don't move them on Shabbat, but on another day, I like always like trip and the wax goes and bad news. Okay. So here we go. So this is again from the Talmud from Shabbat 46b. And so we're kind of dropping in the middle of a very long conversation. It says, Vayra is a contradiction before Rabbi Yosef. Did Rabbi Shimon actually say that when a lamp is extinguished, it's permitted to move it on Shabbat? And so they're kind of expressing shock around Rabbi Shimon. They're like, wait, he wouldn't have said this. This doesn't seem right. How would you, right? Like, what's happening? And he's saying, yes, like after a lamp is already extinguished. So it's been extinguished. If it's no longer fire, okay, you can move it. But if it's not extinguished, then no, you cannot move it, right? So what is the reason? Because perhaps that it's prohibited to move a burning candle. It's due to concern that perhaps as he moves the lamp, the flame will be extinguished. Right? So again, this idea, even if he's not doing it on purpose, there's still that chance, and so he still should not do it, should avoid this whole action, no matter what his intention is, right? And then didn't we learn? And so then they're kind of, the Talmud here is trying to make is trying to understand Rabbi Shimon's opinion, because it seems like he doesn't necessarily have one cogent opinion, and so they're trying to like fit it into their box. They're saying, however, is Rabbi Shimon really concerned that a flame will be extinguished under those circumstances? Didn't we learn that Rabbi Shimon stated a principle, an unintentional act, a permitted action from which an unintended prohibited labor ensues on Shabbat, since he did not pretend to form the prohibited action, is permitted? As it's taught in a Baraita, Rabbi Shimon says a person may drag a bed, chair, and bench on the ground as long as he does not intend to make a furrow. So they're raising this question of like, why might Rabbi Shimon have a problem with the whole fire candle moving thing if in another place he holds that you can drag something, and as long as you didn't intend to make a furrow, right? Because dragging something and making a furrow is like plowing, which you're not supposed to do on Shabbat. So plowing's a no-no. So don't take your plows out next Shabbat. So they're saying, okay, why does Rabbi Shimon in one place hold that you can't move the candle even if you don't mean to extinguish it? And another place, all of a sudden, intention becomes important, because if you don't mean to make a furrow, you can drag your bed or a chair or whatever, right? So these two things seem to kind of contradict, right? Because one thing, it doesn't matter, intention doesn't matter, and when it seems to be, intention does matter. So what's going on? That doesn't make sense. Well, we'll skip down. And so the Gemara answers, I'm here. I skipped all that other part. Right, the Gemara answers that there's a distinction between the cases. In every case where if he intends to perform the action, there's a prohibition by Torah law when he does not intend to do so, even when he does not intend to do so. Right? Rabbi Shimon issued a decree prohibiting it by rabbinic law. However, in every case where he intends to perform the action, there is merely a prohibition by rabbinic law. So this idea that that if it's something, right, so there are different levels of prohibition and different levels of mitzvot. This is kind of a paradigm that exists in all of Jewish law. Is there certain mitzvot and certain commandments and things that are seen as being from the Torah, a Torah law, and it's kind of like the highest form of law. And then there are ones that are seen to be rabbinic laws, and those are like less. And so he's making a difference that if it's a Torah law, if it's a prohibition from the Torah, and fire is one of those. Fire is like a big no-no, right? So fire, because from the Torah, it doesn't matter what your intention is, it's your action. And so this action of, you potentially extinguishing the candle is serious, and it doesn't matter your intent or not, it's there. So there you go. So those are kind of two examples, right? So we have this sikresha, this idea of, right, if you cut off the chicken's head, it's going to die. It doesn't matter if you didn't want the chicken to die, even if you didn't want the chicken to die with all your heart, it's still going to die. So sikresha is, I think, a really important side to hold up, and saying that it's about the action. It's not about the intent. And if you know that your action is going to have a certain consequence, even if you don't want it to, it still has that consequence. Right? I know there are a lot of actions that I wish didn't have the consequences that they did, but they do. And so I have to accept that. And yeah, so there you go. Sikresha, don't play with chicken heads on Shabbat. Rabbi Sachs.
I think, though, that there's the added distinction there of intention. Sikresha, I think, gets into something a little bit deeper about, right, kind of when you should know what the result is going to be, even if that is your intention, is different than, right, a genuine intention. Right? The person who says, I'm chopping off the chicken head just but I don't intend to kill it, right? That's like really a stretch. It's like I think about as a kid getting in trouble for throwing a ball around in the house and something broke, even if we didn't intend to break something, versus if we were throwing it around outside and something broke. Because when you throw a ball in the house, even if you don't intend to break something, you should realize that you're likely going to break something. Right? So I actually want to share another source that's from the Rambam, the Mishnah Torah, from actually right around the same place where you shared yours, except this is 2 halachot later. So we have here in the Mishnah Torah, so I'm just getting there. Right, Rabbi Walker read from Shabbat 1:6, so we're actually looking at Shabbat 1:8 here. One who intends to perform melacha, but does instead a different form of melacha, right, a different prohibited labor that the person didn't intend to do, the person is exempt from it because the person's intention was not carried out. How so? Right, so for example, the person threw a stone or shot an arrow at someone or an animal in order to kill it, right? You're not allowed to kill on Shabbat. And instead of killing it, the projectile here uprooted a tree, right? We could use the same example here as actually the candle. You throw a stone trying to kill a person, not that you would do that, but instead you hit a candle and you extinguish the flame. Right here, it's saying you're not liable because you didn't intend to do that. And the difference here is that it wasn't reasonable for you to expect that was a likely thing to happen, right? So the actual violation of the melacha here does rely on intention. It's just as it does with the example of the chicken head, except there it's ridiculous, right? They pick such a ludicrous idea because they're saying that if you say you intend to chop off a chicken's head but not kill the chicken, right? It's a stretch here. But here you're not liable for putting out that candle, or in this case, the example here is uprooting a tree because you didn't intend that. And it wasn't something that you could reasonably expect to come from your action. Called the Omer, the more so if one intended to perform a lesser melacha, but instead performed a more serious one. So you were just going to violate and go into a Carmelite, into public domain. You were going to carry it from private to public, or sorry, private to a Carmelite, this like quasi area, but instead you brought it into public domain, right? Which is worse. You're exempt because even though you committed a sin, an avera, you didn't commit the sin that you intended to. So I think it's a really interesting source there, right? There is something very, very important in halakha when it comes to intention. And we looked a little bit at intending to unintentional sins. I want to look at mitzvot and intention, right? When you're actually trying to do something, what that does. We saw before, it's greater to do a transgression for good reasons than to do a mitzvah for bad reasons. But can you do a mitzvah unintentionally? So here we're going to look at a few different sources. We'll go through them very quickly because I have a few that I want to show. And Rabbi Walker, please cut me off if I'm going too long, because I want to make sure I get this last one in. It's exciting. All right.
I'm ready.
Mishnah Rosh Hashanah. One who is passing behind a synagogue, or if their house was next to the synagogue and they heard the sound of the shofar or of the Megillah, right? Now it's, even though Mishnah Rosh Hashanah, we're talking about Purim now as well. If they directed their heart, right? They had intention. Im kiven libo yatsa, right? If they direct their heart, im kiven libo, they've fulfilled their obligation. But if not, they have not fulfilled their obligation, even though this one heard and that one heard, this one directed their heart and this one did not. So even though two people were walking by the synagogue while the Megillah reading was happening, or two people were walking by the synagogue while the shofar was being blasted, and they both heard it, right? The same action, one of them who concentrated, who had the intention of doing and fulfilling the obligation, the mitzvah of hearing shofar, hearing Megillah, they've fulfilled it. They've done a mitzvah. The other person who did not have that intention has not. The person has to have the intention of fulfilling a mitzvah. It's not just checking a box. I heard the shofar, checking a box. I heard Megillah. You have to have the intention in order to do it. This is from the Gemara on this. With regard to the intent required in order to fulfill the mitzvah of shofar, Rabbi Zera said to his servant, have intent to sound the shofar on my behalf and sound it for me. The Gemara infers that Rabbi Zera is of an even more extreme opinion. He says not just the person who hears the shofar has to have the intention that they're hearing it, but the person who sounds the shofar for others has to have the intention that they're playing it for other people, right? So now Rabbi Zera adds something interesting in, which gets incorporated actually in the halakha. So if we go now, we started with Mishnah Torah, right? Really one of the first law codes, went back to the Gemara, and now we're in the later code. So Rabbi Zera's position actually becomes normative law. Someone who is engaged in blowing a shofar in order to practice doesn't fulfill his obligation, right? You have to have the obligation when you're blowing the shofar that you're blowing it for the mitzvah. Even though you're blowing the shofar and playing the exact same notes, the intention behind it matters. Similarly, one who hears shofar from such a person doesn't fulfill their obligation. Even if I have the intention that I'm fulfilling the mitzvah of hearing shofar, unless the person blowing the shofar has the intention that they're blowing it for the sake of the mitzvah, I haven't fulfilled my obligation. Their intention matters, not just my own. Similarly, someone who is blowing the shofar to make music and doesn't intend for the mitzvah of blowing the shofar doesn't fulfill their obligation. If the listener intends to fulfill the mitzvah, but the blower doesn't have intent for them to fulfill it, or if the blower has intent for themselves, but the listener doesn't have intent, he doesn't fulfill his obligation until the two of them have intent, the listener and the blower. Right? So almost at the end, they're like a Dr. Seuss book, the blower and the intent and this one and that one, right? But the point of it all is the action isn't what decides it. It's the intention behind it. And we're going to look at another source that I apologize. It's a little racy, but I think it's important. Actually, we're going to look at two sources. One is less racy, so don't get excited yet. Rabba bar Chana said that Rabbi Yochanan said, what is the meaning of what it's written? The ways of the Lord are right and righteous, will walk in them, transgressors will stumble in them, right? The rabbis are interpreting this verse from Hosea, and they compare it to an incident where two people roasted their Paschal offerings, right? The Paschal sacrifice, the Pesach sacrifice. One ate it for the sake of the mitzvah, and one ate it with gusto, right? Just for the sake of eating. They were hungry, and whatever you think ethically about the idea of sacrifice, it made for a great barbecue. And one of them was just hungry and wanted to eat it. The other person was doing it for the sake of the mitzvah. With regard to the person who ate it for the sake of the mitzvah, the righteous will walk in them. And the one that ate it for the sake of just eating it, transgressors will stumble in them. They both did the same act, but only one of them did a mitzvah, even though they both did the same act, because one of them had the intention of the mitzvah and the other did not. We're coming out at a source about the Yevamah. The Yevamah is a situation that happens in biblical law when somebody is married, one brother is married, the brother dies, and their other sibling, their other brother, has a responsibility in the Torah to now marry their brother's widow. And that marriage is affected, I apologize, everyone here, right, is over the age of adulthood. I see a bunch of everyone's bar mitzvah at least. Great. The way that marriage is affected is through the act of sexual intercourse. That is how the brother-in-law marries his wife, his brother's widow, is by having sexual intercourse with her. And there is an interesting question that arises in the Gemara. It's almost like a thought experiment, right? You've all probably heard of the trolley problem. And the idea is that you can't write this crazy hypothetical because we don't, philosophers want to figure out what we really mean when we say something. We're talking about morals and ethics by having the scenario of a train going to run people over or not run people over. So this is the Gemara's version of a thought experiment. They're thinking of something very crazy and out there for the sake of really trying to get at what we mean when we talk about action versus intention. So this is the rabbinic Gemara version of a thought experiment, and really to get at that idea of action versus intention. So the Gemara goes to a statement of Rabbah, and Rabbah said, one who fell from a roof and was inserted into a woman due to the force of his fall is liable to pay 4 types of indemnity, right? It's an interesting scenario. And if she is his Yevamah, he has not acquired her in this manner, right? Somebody who falls off the roof and falls into his dead brother's widow has not become her new husband, right? Because the intention to have sex was not there. The important point there is the intention in the act. They're still negligent for falling off the roof. They still have to pay for damages and other things, but they have not affected a marriage, the Yibum ritual, because what matters there is not the act, but the intention behind it. And that really at the root of this is what matters. And I think that the Jewish sources are quite clear. I'll pass it over now to Rabbi Walker. Are we on our final statements now?
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, where did you find that one? Oh my gosh, Rabbi Sachs.
It goes on to I don't want to tell you. It's
no, I don't think I want to know.
It's the banned books of the Talmud. We'll do a different class on that.
Yeah, no, I will say before I wrap up, it's like that text is so much in like this male view, right? Because we're like, oh, it didn't affect the marriage, right? Okay, so this intent, didn't make it a marriage. But if you're thinking about the woman, like if that was me, I would be pretty pissed off or something, right? Like there is definitely, even though the intent was not to like fall into her or, whatever, that still really affects her.
To be clear though, damages are paid. You're liable for damages, just the marriage hasn't been affected. Okay. But I do agree, it's a male written book.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that right there in a lot of places, it's thinking about intent and also thinking about the action and impact. And right, so I've demonstrated a bunch of different sources, but I think that when I was preparing it, when I was thinking about it, I think it's really something that like for me was more personal, was thinking about, I don't know if this has ever happened to any of you, but when someone tells you a joke that's offensive or hurtful, and like maybe it hurts you, like, and then they say, and maybe challenged them and say, oh, like that wasn't my intent, it was just a joke, right? And I think that that's not a good excuse, right? Like I think that even though if someone intends to do something, they still didn't intend to do something, it still has an impact and it still can be hurtful, right? Like I've definitely experienced that a lot, and I think maybe as a rabbi, sometimes people will feel entitled to say things to me that maybe they shouldn't, or especially I think being a woman, a young woman rabbi, people will tell me jokes or say things that maybe they think are compliments that really make me feel uncomfortable and not great. And even though I'm sure I don't think that anyone's intention is to make me feel uncomfortable or make me feel unsafe or any of that, that at the end of the day, that's what their action did. And so that's how it is in the world, right? In the world, that's how it manifests. So it's not intention, it's the action, and it's how that action is perceived by others, right? So it's kind of like adding an additional piece to it. But I think it's really important to think about, okay, what impact does this action have? I think going back to, we have a few other like Jewish sources. I think you mentioned a bunch of things about how intention is really important for certain mitzvot. And I think there are also others where it's just the action. And my favorite, to take it to like a lighter side, my favorite thing is the counting of the Omer. Okay, so right, the counting the Omer, when we're counting the Omer between Passover and Shavuot, you might have noticed, I don't know if you're in shul, but a lot of times when someone's getting ready to count the Omer, when someone's getting ready to count the Omer, they'll usually say, okay, remember yesterday was like 22 days, right? Meaning that like today we're going to count 23. And they never say, oh, today's the 23rd day. And then, and why is that? It's because even if you don't have the intention to count, if you say the number, you've counted, right? So that's why, I don't know why. Sometimes I like have these things that I like to correct people on. That's one of them, because I think it's kind of harmless. But this idea that even if you didn't have the intention, even if you're just telling people what day it is so that we can go and count in the Hebrew, even if you said it out loud, you still counted, right? So there's not that intention, but you've still counted and it still counts. And now you can't, you're not supposed to say the blessing and do it again because you've just done it. And so there are a bunch of things like that. Yeah, sorry, I'm like seeing some things in the chat and I'm getting distracted. But yeah, so I think that there's a lot of things in Judaism that it's about your action, it's not about intent, and our actions have impact regardless of what our intention was or wasn't. And I think our tradition really does show us that, and show that we have to look at the impact, and it's not just about what we were thinking, and we can have the best intentions in mind, but it's how it's perceived, and it's what those actions are that are actually important.
I have to say the Omer is a phenomenal example. It's a phenomenal example that really stands out there as very unique. And I don't have a great response to the Omer, but I want to dive a little bit into the first part, right? Obviously, when somebody says something mean or hurtful, even if it's unintentional, right? The action is still there. I'm not denying that at all. But I imagine, I won't put you on the spot to answer, but I imagine someone who said something offensive, accidentally not realizing what they were doing is offensive, as bad as that might be, that worse is the person who says something offensive intending to offend. Right? I have to imagine that is there. And that, I think, is actually what our sources really are trying to get at. They're not saying that intention is all that matters. Action does matter, only that action is important, and then intention is this extra step. Intending to do bad is worse than not intending to do bad, and intending to do good is better than doing good unintentionally. And we'll look at just a couple of quick things for the conclusion as we do that. This is Rabbi Bachia on Bamidbar talking about the idea of the cities of refuge and exile. And it's very simple here, that a person who killed unintentionally, such a person is not guilty of the death penalty, since they did not intend to kill their victim. The law demonstrates that the heart of the person is the prime driving force of a person's activities. The principle applies to the performance of all the commandments as well to the commission of any sins. Exile is the penalty here, because a man's heart was not associated with the action. The death penalty only applies when a body and heart have committed the sin in question in tandem, in agreement with each other. It's very, very simple here. A person's intent is the biggest predictor of future action, of how they're going to behave in the future. And we see this here in the 10 commandments, right? In the 10 commandments, the 10 utterances. There is one of them that is a thought crime. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or their male or female slave or their ox or their ass or anything that is your neighbor's. How can you punish somebody for thinking something, right? We punish deeds, not thoughts. Well, Sforno says that the object you covet should be so utterly unattainable to you that you won't even hatch schemes to acquire it, right? But once you begin to covet, we're about halfway through here. Once you begin to covet something belonging to someone else, it is only a short step to committing robbery, right? Our intentions predict our actions. So once you start to covet, to have bad intentions, bad actions are going to follow. Obviously, acting on bad intentions is worse than acting on good intentions or having bad intentions without acting. But it's where it all ends up that matters, right? If we all for a minute thought ourselves to be a judge and jury, and you have before you two different cases to decide. One was somebody who driving their car intended to drive over people at a bus stop, but didn't. They made a mistake and they missed the bus stop completely and slammed into a fire hydrant instead. Nobody got hurt. Versus somebody else was intending only to keep on driving and accidentally lost control of their car and hit a bus stop and injured or even killed people there, right? And it's up to you to decide who gets their license back, right? Who gets to go to jail? Who gets to go to jail for longer? I imagine, if you're being honest with yourself, the person who intended to run over people, even if that wasn't their ultimate action in the end, they were unable to accomplish their goal, that they're the person who gets to go to jail. They're the person who doesn't ever get to drive again, versus the person, 17-year-old who lost control of their car. Maybe they don't go to jail for so long. Maybe they don't go to jail at all. Maybe they eventually get to drive again. Because the person who intended to hurt people, even if their action didn't succeed, they're going to continue to intend to hurt people. And the person who accidentally injured people, if that wasn't their intention, and it's all the more likely that in the future, they're not going to do that again. What matters is our intentions, because our intentions predict our behavior. They predict who we are. And my final source, I promise, this is also Rambam. We looked at a lot of Mishnah Torah. Here's a little Rambam from his Guide for the Perplexed, his philosophy. We must bear in mind that all such religious acts as reading the law, praying, and the performance of other precepts, right? Everything we've been talking about tonight serve exclusively as the means of causing us to occupy and fill our mind with the precepts of God and free it from worldly business. For we are thus, as it were, in communication with God and undisturbed by any other thing. If we, however, pray with the motion of our lips, or our actions, and our face toward the wall, but at the same time think of our business, right? We're doing one thing, but our intent is something else. If we read the law with our tongue while our heart is occupied with the building of our house, we do not think of what we are reading. If we perform the commandments only with our limbs, we are like those engaged in digging in the ground or hewing wood in the forest, without reflecting on the nature of those acts or by whom they are commanded, or what is their object, right? It's like chopping down trees for no reason. You're doing an act, but you're not planning to make a fire, to build something with the wood, or do anything. It is a meaningless act. We must not imagine that in this way we attain the highest perfection. On the contrary, we are then like those in reference to whom Scripture says, "Thou art near in their mouth and far from their reins." Rambam is saying that the ultimate form of not just prayer, but every mitzvah, every worship, every Jewish act is to not do it mindlessly, but to do it with intent. Action is important, right? Whether or not you chop down the tree, that makes a difference. But if you intend to do it for a purpose, it elevates it to something else. And the same goes for all of Jewish life and Jewish ritual. Intention predicts the future. It predicts who we are. And that at the end is what ultimately matters. And I will end there. Thank you so much. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So yeah, if people have questions they want to ask in the chat. I know some people made comments and I tried to read some. But yeah, I mean, I think that like I feel like each time we do one of these, it just further reinforces that like it's really neither. It's both.
Well, we didn't really start with the whole caveat this time, but that was a big part of what inspired this class. Is we both get driven crazy when people say Judaism says X or Judaism says Y, because the truth is, which I hope we've conveyed to people over the last 3 weeks, is that Judaism says X, Y, and also Z, right? Or maybe A, B, C, D as well, right? That we have a thousands of year old tradition, and there's so much in there. It's such a rich tradition. We're going to look at the comments, but if you have a question that you sent earlier and we haven't gotten to because it's got buried up there, please send it again so we can make sure we can answer and address everything.
Yeah, ask questions. I think also, another thing is that like, I feel like there's also so many different situations where things matter more or less, right? So we have different mitzvot where intention is really important and some which aren't, and kind of everywhere in between, right? It's like there's like so many situational differences that, in our arguments, we kind of like try and collapse all of them. But like, there's so many, like we could, go through and do like, okay, where is intention like the most important and like list it out, and where is it the least important or whatever, right? There's like just so many kind of different shades in this argument. And I love that it took us through prayer and Shabbat, and we got like almost all the holidays in there. And right, that this is a question that really spans kind of Jewish, like all of Jewish law and Jewish observance, and then of course also in our own lives and thinking about how we do things with intention, but also the actions. So
it doesn't look like there are a lot of questions tonight, so maybe we'll just say thank you to everyone for joining us.
Oh wait, should we do the poll?
Do you want to do the poll? You can put the poll up, and I'll say, while you do that, I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and have a happy Hanukkah and all of that. But really, I've been very happy with these polls before, because the goal is for people to learn something new, to think about something differently, and that seems to so far have been what's happening. And we'll see now.
We'll see. We don't want to skew the poll.
I'm skewing.
Yeah. Okay, we got people are voting. So fun. While you're doing that, we're thinking about doing more. So if you're interested or you have topic ideas or things you'd like to see us argue, we're open to that. Also it's been really nice. I think it's nice to have our two congregations come together, and also people from all over. I know people who aren't affiliated with either, but it's been nice to have this group together. And I really appreciate you all putting aside your Wednesday evenings to come learn with us.